I said in the tweet was, as you see here, the most progressive world leaders are those maligned by the United States. Xi Jinping, Daniel Ortega, these include. Now, maybe if I had more space and I wanted to do a thread, which I really didn't want to do, I would have said these these include, but is not exclusive, because this is not all of the leaders, I think, play a progressive role in the world. But I said they include Xi Jinping, Daniel Ortega, Nicolas Maduro, Bashar al-Assad, and Vladimir Putin, which I think is the one that has gotten the most backlash. And I think I can understand why, because of the Russia-Ukraine situation. I said each is standing up heroically to U.S. imperialism and promoting a vision of true independence from it. That's a pretty simple point, I believe. I don't think that that's controversial. But of course, whenever you put the names of these kind of leaders all in one tweet, it brings out basically all the anti-communists, all of the unhinged liberals and neoliberals and neocons, and all of the various ways in which these bourgeois, reactionary, ideological frameworks come together, stand apart, all at the same time. But, you know, I think it's important for me to share what I mean by this. But first, before I do that, I want to do so in the context of a response to me that I found very troubling. So I'm just going to scroll down on my own Twitter. Here it is. So Stephen Gowans is someone that I had once a lot of respect for. And given that his breadth of work actually is really great, I've read a lot of his books. I've read his book on Israel, a beachhead in the Middle East, of the United States. I've read his book on Israel. I've read his book on Syria. I've read most of his articles that he's published up until February 2022. But something has happened since the Russia military operation, the Russia-led military operation in Ukraine, right? A lot has happened since then. And we've talked about this before, how a lot of people who consider themselves left of the Democrats or left of liberal, or don't consider themselves liberal at all, consider themselves socialist, communist, anti-imperialist, a lot of them lost their minds during this period. A lot of them became very confused and really have shown their true colors. So for me, I've enjoyed his work. I think his work on imperialism, in terms of what he's written in his books, very valuable. So I'm not going to say don't read those books, because actually they reflect a lot differently, a lot different politics than you see here. Because what you see here is him equating my position as being akin to apologizing for fascism, because I'm calling, and you'll see in the thread that he makes, he's talking about Putin almost specifically, where he says that, he just copies my tweet as if I'm in 1941, and that I would have for Tojo and Mussolini and Hitler, that I would have, right? And this is a very liberal, anti-communist talking point, that, okay, all these leaders, they are equal to fascists. It doesn't matter if they call themselves socialists. It doesn't matter if they stand against the United States. They're still fascists. And so in the next tweet, he tries to say, it's not like, I'm not trying to liken Xi to Hitler, but to illustrate this facile character, the facile character of my view, of Dhaiphong's view. Opposition to U.S. imperialism does not by itself make one progressive. Otherwise, Hitler, Mussolini, and Tojo. So he thinks, this is what's so funny. Who has this analysis? I really want to question anyone, including Stephen Gowans, who has an analysis of fascism, especially Nazism, Mussolini, Hitler, as being opposed to imperialism. That's a very strange position. They were not opposed to imperialism. What imperialism? Their principal goal was to destroy the Soviet Union and to eradicate any resistance, especially communist resistance, to fascist domination, and fascism being really unhinged, unmitigated capitalist expansionism. That's what fascism is. It's all of the guardrails are down, and any alternative to capitalism is smoked out. That's what Nazism did. That's what it tried to do. That's why it also had a huge racial component to it, a huge racist component to it. So I don't know who, where, what idea of being opposed to imperialism anyone can think fascism. That to me is this very liberal worldview, bourgeois worldview, anti-communist worldview, which has said over the course of history, especially since the Soviet Union, 1917, that, and then of course during World War I and World War II, that so-called totalitarianism is both on the right and on the left. That's what Red Scare fearmongers, these anti-communist McCarthyists, that's what they've done. That's how they've justified anti-communism, really, that it's akin to fascism. But that's not, there's no factual relation between the two. Absolutely none. So even though he says, oh, well, I'm not trying to do this, he's actually doing it and trying to walk it back in some degree. But then he says all this weird stuff about being an anti-imperialist as a person who eats fish and chicken, not beef, or is a vegetarian, like all this nonsense, right? He's just going after people. He's done this with Carlos Martinez, friend of the show. I've had him on, co-editor, Friends of Socialist China. He's going after Jay Therapal, who's another anti-imperialist. And, we don't all agree on everything all the time. I mean, Carlos and I are very close politically. We work together. But, not all of us agree on everything all the time. However, it seems that because we've taken a staunch anti-imperialist worldview, especially on this question of Russia, especially on this question of Putin, and especially on this question of how the world situation relates to Russia's current position and leadership, that we are kind of ripe for the targeting. So I want to address exactly why this is just completely and utterly ridiculous, why this is reactionary, and why Putin does occupy a progressive position in the world. All right. So here's the deal. Many leftists in the United States, or people who call themselves the left, they think of progressive as Democrat, or they think of progressive as reform, domestic economic reform, social democracy, right? Bernie Sanders, AOC. That's how most people view the term progressive. And if there are people to the left of that use the word progressive, oftentimes they're talking about a kind of overall political orientation to the left of the Democratic Party, even to the left of the squad, Bernie Sanders, etc., social democracy, even in Europe, right? So we could even extend it there. That maybe to the left of even that, right? Maybe progressive is even anti-imperialist. But the very dominant strain of what people view as progressive is mainly liberal, okay? But the way I'm using it here is not liberal, okay? And I'll just go back to my tweet on this matter. So I'm not using progressive here in the liberal sense that Vladimir Putin shares ideologically everything that, let's say, AOC shares or the squad, right? I don't think that they have the same positions maybe on certain social issues, right? LGBTQ rights, etc. I think it's well overblown. I don't think that it is so simple, the position that we've heard around LGBTQ rights in Russia. I think that there is a large element of foreign interference, of imperialist interference with these neoliberal kind of co-opted ideas, these kind of color revolutionary ideas that fuel color revolutions. I think that's a very real problem and really informs the overall position of the Russian government at this time toward things like LGBTQ rights. But nonetheless, I don't think AOC or Bernie Sanders would have the same position as Vladimir Putin. But does that make Vladimir Putin as an individual not a progressive force in the world? I don't think that's accurate. I think that there's another understanding of progressive that we have to kind of de-individualize, because oftentimes we think about leaders, You think about it, leaders as just individuals, right? And of course they are. That's objective. They are one person. They live and they breathe, and there's a physiological basis to that. But they are products of history, products of a moment, products of class struggle, products of geopolitical interests, of development, right? That Vladimir Putin is part of what I would call an epical shift in geopolitics. And him as an individual has played a relatively progressive role in this epical shift. And what I mean by this epical shift is a multipolar world. Vladimir Putin is a leader in this multipolar world. So if we use the word progressive as meaning innovative, creating change, and creating change in the correct direction, we have to say that Putin is in fact doing that. Now, of course, there's going to be a lot of debate around, okay, well, Vladimir Putin also sanctioned and spurred and put on this invasion of Ukraine. That's what a lot of detractors will say. And then, of course, we will go back, and how we answer that is saying, well, this conflict is not as simple as you make it out to be. It's not just a matter of Russia and Vladimir Putin being some kind of evil force that wants to destroy Ukraine without any kind of rhyme or reason, that it just wants expansion for expansion's sake. It has the same aims as US imperialism. It wants to loot Ukraine. It wants to take over Ukraine, etc. All of that is folly and nonsense, right? The context, the real context here is that Ukraine is being used as a pawn for US aggression toward Russia, real imperialist aggression, US NATO aggression toward Russia. Ukraine is a chip. It is a potential NATO country. It is really a de facto NATO country. And since the coup in 2014, and even arguably before then, Ukraine was being used as a kind of hub of some of the most right-wing fascistic nationalism to create this very situation, this very buildup toward conflict, to create a real hostile situation on Russia's border in East Ukraine. That's why so many thousands of people, 14,000+ people, who knows how many more after this conflict is over, but 14,000+ people right as the conflict began. That's why so many people in East Ukraine and Donbass have died, have been killed. And they've been killed by majority Azov forces, Ukrainian army forces. These forces are interlocked and very much linked, and we don't have to go over and over and over again how that's the case. So the point here is that Vladimir Putin is playing a progressive role in the world, that he, along with Xi Jinping, are the principal leaders in the multipolar world. They have the biggest economies. They have a really clear, solid worldview that does come together in very integral ways. This move toward integration, toward economic integration, toward a military alliance, toward an alliance that counters color revolutions, that undermines US sanctions, that works with and aids countries that are under siege by US imperialism. Russia and China are doing that. Fascism doesn't do that. Nazism in Germany didn't do that. In Italy, it didn't do that. We have to stop kidding ourselves that they are the same thing. That is a liberal, neoconservative, anti-communist, and McCarthyist worldview. And really, it's a straw man argument because it doesn't get into the facts of the situation. It doesn't get into the facts that are on the ground right now. The material reality is that Putin is playing a progressive role in the world.